the biggest negative consequence of gender. The violence which is based on the gender concepts, the gender norms, the gender roles, the gender expectations. So with regard to gender-based violence, I will be touching on what is gender-based violence, the definition, global evidence, Sri Lankan experience, the impact of gender-based violence on health, causes and factors, why is it hidden, the ecological framework if time permits, and milestones addressing GBV, and what do we do in health sector. So if we look at the definition, there are many definitions for gender-based violence. So there is no one definition, there are many, but all these definitions try to say the same thing in different terms, but the meaning would be the same. So here this definition is the first definition made by United Nations in 1993, and the definition tries to say that the major terms of this definition is that it should be an act of violence, and that act of violence should occur based on the gender concepts, and this should result in or likely to result in, and they have named the types of violence: physical violence, sexual, psychological, economical, or coercion, threatening, deprivation of liberty. So all these are considered as violent acts. And whether it occurs in the public or whether it occurs in a private space, it is considered as violence. And in the at the beginning, in the first definition, although gender means male and female both, it was mainly targeted for women. The definition was targeted for women. Why? Because 95% of the time, only the women would be penalized because of this gender concepts. But now the term women is being changed to individual, so that it includes both men and women. So if we look at the types of GBV, physical, psychological or emotional. Now most of the time we recognize only the physical violence because it can be seen from outside, but the psychological and emotional violence is not, most of the time is not recognized, but it is associated with any violence. But even if it is physical, it would be physical with emotional violence. And there is sexual violence and social violence. Social violence examples are that that they would be cornered from the society. They will not be they would not be allowed to move in the society. So that is social violence, or else there would be the economic violence. Economic violence is that sometimes economically there would be violence, that they would not be supplied with the basic needs like the food and the clothes and etc. By the person who earns or who gets the economical gains. And most of the time only one act of violence will not occur. There would be overlapping of violent acts in a relationship. So if we look at the magnitude of the problem can be compared to to an iceberg in the ocean. So we all know that an iceberg, only the tip of the iceberg is seen from outside, and the biggest major portion of the iceberg would be hidden under the water. So this problem is also like that. It is hidden, and what we see, what we read from newspapers, or what we hear in TV news or radio news or whatever, or from word to word or mouth to mouth, is only the tip of the iceberg. So it is considered as a hidden problem. So the reasons for why it's been hidden, there are many reasons, because sometimes I would come to this again in another slide. So there are cultural reasons, and the victim or the survivor would be concerned or would be dependent on the perpetrator, and there are concerns over children and the shame, because it's considered as a shameful thing to say that someone is being battered by the husband. And sometimes they internalize the violence. They think that they are eligible for that because they have done something wrong. So this violence cuts across all ages and all social strata, because it's been divided. The gender or gender concepts are being constructed by the society, so it is available in all social strata across all ages. And in some conditions, some women are more vulnerable compared to other women. That is among displaced populations, when they are using public transport, etc. So when we talk about the evidence, global evidence, this is what the WHO says. The WHO says that 1 in 3 women will experience physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner at some point in her life. So 1 in 3 is a big percentage, big proportion. 1 in 3 women will experience physical and sexual violence, or physical or sexual violence by the partner at some point during her life. So gender-based violence refers to harmful acts directed to an individual based on gender. That is why we call it gender-based violence. And there are 3 main causes for this violence. So those are gender inequality, abuse of power, and disrespect for human rights. When we consider gender-based violence against a woman, that means violence that is directed towards a woman because she's a woman. And we all know that women are affected disproportionately. What is intimate partner violence? Intimate partner violence means the behavior by an intimate partner. It can be a partner, the present partner or ex-partner, which would cause physical, sexual, psychological harm. So, and it includes physical aggression, sexual coercion, physical abuse, controlling behaviors, psychological abuse, everything. So it is the same as under gender-based violence. This is one kind of violence that we talk about, intimate partner violence. So sexual violence means any sexual act or attempt to obtain a sexual act. It might be a sexual act or just an attempt to obtain a sexual act, or other act directed against another person, a person's sexuality, by using caution, and this is regardless of their relationship. And this can happen in the private setting or in a public setting. So it might include rape or otherwise not only rape, any sexual act which is not tolerated or which is not accepted by the receiver is considered as a sexual violence. Any act of sexual nature, it can be verbal, it can be physical, which is not tolerated, which is not accepted by the receiver, is considered as a sexual violence. So if we look at the Sri Lankan situation with regard to gender-based violence, this is only one evidence. We call it the demographic health survey. This happened in 2016, and the demographic health survey is a world recognized survey which happens in many countries at the same time every 5 to 6 years globally. So the conclusions in these surveys can be compared with other countries as well. So this is the survey is recognized globally, and according to the survey which happened in 2016, 17% of ever married women across the country, these women were in the reproductive age, and they have encountered gender-based violence by their partners during the last 12 months. And these slides also try to say that gender-based violence exists in all social stratas. It doesn't exclude any social group or any social level. So this was a study done in Sri Lanka among the general practitioners, that is the doctors working in the private sector. And they were asked many questions with regard to gender-based violence to look at their attitudes. And one question was to ask, if there was a conflict or domestic fight, then the question was, women should settle domestic fights by themselves without asking for help. So it's their responsibility, the responsibility of the woman to settle the fight within the intimate partnership relationship. And roughly about 40% of the doctors agreed that it's okay, it's correct. So that is their attitude. Then the second question was, husband can demand sex at any time if he feels like. Again, closer to 40% agreed and said that it's correct. So this is the attitudes of a high class so-called medical officers in the country. And this is another example. And this was on the back of the three-wheeler. And two pictures. One picture shows that there is a problem. The problem is the shouting or speaking of the woman. And how to settle or solve the problem is to kick her out. So this is also a message to the general public, because everyone sees it. Even the small children going on the road, walking on the road, sees this and they think that this is normal. So they also would learn from this. There is another study. This study was done among males, and they were asked about sexual abuse, and from men who said that they have done sexual abuse or sexual violence to another person, or perpetrated sexual violence to another person. They were asked why they did so. Men's motivations for perpetrating sexual violence inclusive of rape against intimate partners or non-partners. This was maybe for the partner or non-partner. They've asked reasons why they did it, and 66.5% of the men who have perpetrated sexual violence said it's their sexual entitlement. They're entitled, being males, they're entitled to sexually perpetrate another person, another woman. And roughly about 20% said they did it for fun, or they were bored because they were bored they did it. And 13.4% said they were angry, so they did it as a punishment. Roughly closer to 10% said they were under the influence of alcohol, so they didn't know what they did, so they perpetrated sexual violence. So this is called the gender-based violence tree. So it's a huge tree, and globally, gender-based violence is compared to this huge tree. So like any other tree, this tree, the GBV tree, also has all its components. So when we start from the fruits are the negative consequences of violent acts. So it can be rape, it can be death, it can be murder, or it can be an injury or whatever. And the branches of this tree contains all violent acts. So there are enough violent acts for all the branches of this huge tree. Then if we look at the roots of this tree, unlike any other tree which has only one main root, this GBV tree has 3 main roots, and they are considered as the root causes of gender-based violence. So what are the 3 roots? Number 1, disrespect for human rights. We are born with equal dignity as humans, and any human has to respect the other human. If one human is perpetrating violence against another human, that is, we disrespect for human rights. We are violating the human rights of the other person. So that is disrespect for human rights and abuse of power. Now the society, with the stereotype, the society has given more power to one kind, that is to the males. So if they abuse their power and perpetrate violence on the other person, that is called, and that is regarded as abuse of power. And the third root cause is gender inequality. There are 2 kinds in the gender, and there is no equality between them. There is a discrimination. Because of the discrimination, one kind is more powerful, and that kind which is more powerful abuses their power and tries to control and use the power or abuse the power for all the reasons. So that is why this violence occurs. So this is called gender-based violence. And there are some reasons written on the trunk of the tree. Although there are 3 root causes and they are the real root causes for this problem, the society doesn't understand this, because these are attitudinal problems. The society only constructs the gender norms and the gender roles and behaviors. So they don't understand. They think that the gender-based violence is because of maybe alcohol, because of the violent society, maybe the impunity, because the laws are not being practiced well, or because of stigma, poverty, lack of education, etc. These are not the root causes, but these things might contribute to to the enhancement of violence, or there may be a contribution of these factors to violence. So we call them as contributing factors but not causes. So if we want to get rid of gender-based violence, we have to get the tree by the roots. If we don't do that, if we think only these factors affect violence, and if we cut the tree by the trunk, then again, because the roots would be there, again the tree will shoot up. So for us to get rid of the gender-based violence, we have to remove the roots as well. But removing the roots takes long time, so it needs long-term action. And the factors in the trunk, on the trunk, would compared to the roots, would need short-term action. So we have to have two ways, two plans for getting rid of the tree. First, to get rid of the contributing factors, plus the long-term action to get rid of the roots. So if we look at the health consequences of gender-based violence, first it can be divided into two main groups, which has fatal outcomes and non-fatal outcomes. The fatal outcomes are the homicides, suicides, the maternal deaths, the deaths due to HIV/AIDS, etc. The non-fatal can be divided into the physical injuries which happen, and the mental problems, reproductive health issues, and high-risk behavior which would lead to untimely death. So the WHO also says that women exposed to intimate partner violence are at twice at risk of mental health consequences, and also if they are pregnant, if a pregnant woman is exposed to violence, she has a 16% tendency to have a low birth weight baby. So when we talk about the pregnant women, pregnancy does not stop or lessen the violence, because evidence says, research evidence says that more than 30% of the abused pregnant women have reported that the violence started during the pregnancy. How does this affect children? Although we don't realize, children are the silent victims of violence, and we call them the forgotten victim. So there are many changes in children of violent families. There would be stuttering, there would be panic attacks, there would be many behavioral problems. Sometimes it might lead to delinquency and risk-taking behaviors, and these children have very low self-esteem, and they have interpersonal difficulties. That is, they can't associate with another person. They mistrust others, so they don't have social groups, they don't have social interaction, very poor social skills. Also, they have psychosomatic illness. Sometimes they don't go to, there's absenteeism because they don't go to school. They say that sometimes they have headaches, stomach aches, etc. So, unexplainable illnesses. And also cognitive problems, very poor school performance. And the most negative consequence is there's a higher probability of this person, especially a male, becoming a perpetrator in the future as an adult. And on the other hand, there's a higher probability of the female, the girl child, becoming a victim or a survivor when she becomes an adult. So this is called normalization of gender-based violence. That is, after seeing the conflicts, disputes at home and how the father controls the mother, they think that this is normal. So they try to adopt the same thing into their lives. So if there is violence in one family, that is suffering for 3 generations. The picture explains it all. If we look at the cycle of violence refers to repeated and dangerous acts of violence, and it happens as a cycle. And we call it the cycle of violence. So it can happen many times during a relationship, but what happens is with time the frequency increases and the severity of violence also increases. So ultimately there is a possibility of the violence ending up with death. How does this gender concept affect the adolescents? Mainly, if we talk about dating violence, again, dating violence also comes under the gender-based violence, and it also has the components we described earlier as the acts of violence. It can be physical, sexual, psychological, within a dating relationship. So, as I said earlier, physical, psychological, sexual, repeated texting. Stalking is following a person and disturbing them, harassing or threatening or after following them. And repeated texting, posting sexual pictures. So all this is considered as comes under dating violence, the types. So risk factors for perpetration of violence. What are the risk factors? The attitudes. They try to justify the use of violence. Now they try to connect this with the gender norms and say, I did it because you didn't do it or you did this. So they try to justify the use of violence. And sometimes it may be the behavior, substance abuse, or having risky sexual behaviors because they have started their sexual activity early. They must be having multiple partners. So it's a risk. So we have to consider these things. And peer influence of the others, how the others influence them or pressurize them. So that pressure also matters. Then there are some personal factors. Prior exposure to violence, that is, the prior exposure may be at home, at the home setting, or with the peers, and having a history of aggression towards the friends, the peers, low self-esteem. So they try to abuse the power that they have as a male with the low self-esteem, and lack of life skills. So when the life skills are inadequate, the coping strategies are inadequate. So they try to use when with anger and with blaming, try to get and they try to change the partner. And these are the motives for resorting to dating violence. Anger is one motive. Then for self-defense and desire to take control over the other person, the partner. Early warning signs of an abusive partner. So what are the early warning signs? If we see that these are the signs of my partner, then we would be able to decide on whether to continue or not. So, one, demand details about how you spend your time. And they try to restrict contact with the family or with the friends. So, that is restrict social relationships. Or criticize you or what's important to you. So, what is important to another person is being criticized by the partner. Or try to control the behavior, the dress code of the partner. Touching the partner in public without permission in a sexual manner, and cause or pressurize into unhealthy activities, and ignore the physical boundaries or violate the physical boundaries. Also try to control the reproductive choices of the other person. So if we look at the health effects of dating violence, so this dating violence would lead to low self-esteem, low self-confidence, which would ultimately lead to unhealthy behaviors like using tobacco, drugs, maybe alcohol, would lead to depression, anxiety, suicidal attempts, suicidal feelings, etc.